Welcome to Animology, a podcast about language, the animal-related words and expressions we use every day, and how they shape and reflect our relationship with animals. My name is Colleen Patrick-Goudreau. You can find me at ColleenPatrick-Goudreau.com and this podcast at animologypodcast.com. Of course, you can subscribe to Animology at iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, wherever you listen to podcasts. And I really appreciate all of you for sharing this podcast and leaving ratings and reviews. Word of mouth is the best way to share, and your support makes this podcast possible. You can become a patron, a supporter, in the truest sense of the word by going to patreon.com/Colleen Patrick-Goudreau, or you can just hit the donate button at ColleenPatrick-Goudreau.com. Today's episode is Berserk for bears, words from our Ursine animals. We have many words built from the English word for bear, the Latin word for bear, and the Greek word for bear, and we have many expressions and phrases built from that same furry animal. Of course, there are also many expressions using the verb to bear, as in to carry, such as in bearing fruit, bearing a child, or bearing a burden, or bearing a grudge. And we're going to explore the origins of all of these words and expressions. The word bear, to refer to these powerful, incredible animals, is from Old English. The word bear is an Old English word. It is first attested in English writing in the year 1000. The word was originally bera, B-E-R-A, from Germanic beron, and it meant the brown one, from the Proto-Indo-European root B-H-E-R, which meant bright or brown. Now, that same Proto-Indo-European root gives us English words such as brown, brunette, which was borrowed from French, and bruin, which is the proper name for the brown bear in the allegorical Reynard the Fox fables that were popular in Northwest European literature. So all those words are cognate: bear, brown, brunette, and even burnish, as in to shine with polishing, and then bruin, all from the Proto-Indo-European root that gives us the word bear. Now, interestingly, the bear has nicknames in many northern languages, nicknames or euphemisms that seem to stem from the fact that it was forbidden or taboo to say the name of the bear, to say the word bear, most likely out of fear. So, for instance, you have nicknames in Finnish for bears such as honey hand or honey paw, or nectar hand or nectar paw. In Sweden, he would be called sweetfoot. In Russian, Czech, and Polish, instead of bear, you would say honey eater. Now, there are a lot of reasons and theories for why there were taboos on animal names. Bear isn't the only one, and that discussion is bigger than the scope of our topic today. But the taboo on the word bear brings us to our first animology, a name that is reminiscent of these taboo words for bear, but that was likely chosen for more poetic reasons. Now, hopefully you have read or at least heard of Beowulf, the 8th century epic poem that is one of the oldest surviving pieces of literature in the English language. The hero of the story is Beowulf, whose name itself is an etymology. Beowulf in Old English was a compound word, beo plus wolf. In Old English, beo meant bee, as in honeybee, and wolf, W-U-L-F, would have meant wolf as in the canine animal, but it was also a general term for hunter. So Beowulf is believed by many scholars to mean bee hunter. In other words, an animal who hunts or pursues bees, honeybees, for the food the bees produce, which is honey, and an animal who loves honey and is known for attacking beehives for their honey is a bear. So Beowulf, bee hunter, honey lover, bear. I said that the word Beowulf is a compound word, and it is, as you can see. In this sense, it's also considered what's called a kenning. A kenning was a figurative expression common in Old English and Old Norse poetry that took the place of a name or a noun. So a storm of swords, for example, is a kenning for a battle. A wave rider is a kenning for a boat. So Beowulf, meaning bee hunter, is a kenning for a bear. Now, Beowulf, the character, he was a fierce warrior. He defeated the monster Grendel as well as Grendel's mother. He fought a dragon who was ultimately the cause of Beowulf's demise. Nonetheless, Beowulf was strong. He was bold. He was powerful. He was intimidating like a bear. He even had a ferocious grip and fought Grendel's mother without using weapons. Bears factored prominently into Norse legends and sagas, most certainly influencing Anglo-Saxon tales and stories and influencing warriors and how they fought. In fact, Norse warriors who would have been devoted to the bear cults that were common to many tribes in the Northern Hemisphere drew their superhuman strength and power on the battlefield from the bears they worshipped. These warriors were uncommonly strong and outfitted with the skins of the bears they hunted. They would overcome their enemies by raging and howling and even foaming at the mouth as they flew and fought at their enemies on the battlefield with a frenzied zeal. These Norse warriors were called berserkers, believed to be built from the word for bear and the word for shirt. Berserkers, thus literally a warrior dressed in bearskin. Now, we don't talk of berserkers anymore, but we do have what we would call a back formation of that word berserker, and that is the word berserk, which is common today. Berserk is an adjective meaning destructively or frenetically violent, named for this band of wild Norse warriors known for their savagery in battle, known for wearing bear skins. Now, you might think we're more civilized than the warriors of old who wore the skins of animals to display their terror, but of course we still wear the skins of animals, exacting terror rather than displaying it, for vanity's sake in the form of leather and calfskin and fur. And of course, bear skins are still worn today, not to demonstrate military might, but as ceremonial garments in the form of bearskin caps worn by military and military bands in such countries as Belgium, Canada, Denmark, Italy, Netherlands, Sweden, the US, and the UK. No doubt you're familiar with the uniform of the Queen's Guard if you've ever been to Buckingham Palace or St. James Palace or the Tower of London. Bearskin hats are made from the skins of North American black bears. Around 100 new bearskin caps are purchased every year by the British Army, and it takes the skin of an entire individual bear to make one of these caps that you see as part of the uniform worn by these guardsmen. Now, animal advocates have been calling on the UK to replace these bearskin hats with synthetic alternatives for years. And though some progress has been made in other cases of animal skins worn by British officials, fake leopard skin is now worn by drummers in marching bands, and the smaller Busby hats worn by the King's Troop are no longer made from beaver fur. But real bearskins are still being used to make the hats of the Queen's Guard, as well as hats in other countries. This is not just in the UK. British spokespeople as recently as 2016 have said that they still haven't found a material to match the properties of bear fur, so they're not phasing them out anytime soon, which makes me and millions of people who care about animals absolutely berserk. Aside from Beowulf, we also have other proper names with bears in their origins. I already mentioned Bruin, which was the name of the bear character in the Reynard fables. We also have the Germanic male name Bjorn, which comes from this Proto-Indo-European word for bear. And we see that name Bjorn with spelling variations in English, Dutch, Swedish, Finnish, Icelandic, German, Faroese, Norwegian, Danish, and Hungarian. Now, we may know some Bjorns in our own lives. We certainly know some famous Bjorns, like Bjorn Borg, the Swedish tennis player. And if you have children or friends who have children, perhaps they carry their babies around in their baby Bjorn, a well-known brand of baby carriers named for the founder of the company. If you're familiar with J.R.R. Tolkien's book, The Hobbit, you'll remember there's a character who lived between the Misty Mountains and Mirkwood with his retinue of animals. And Tolkien makes sure to mention that he doesn't hunt or eat animals. His name was Bjorn, B-E-O-R-N, and he's described as bear-like with his long black hair. He's also a skin changer, as he's able to shapeshift into the figure of a great black bear. So that's Bjorn, meaning bear. We also have the masculine name, also of Germanic origins, from the same root for bear in the name Barnard, literally meaning bear bold, with from bear plus ARD, meaning hard, strong, or bold. And that's the same etymology for the male name Bernard or Bernard, bold as a bear. The Saint Bernard, as in the dog breed, is probably our most familiar use of that name, Bernard. And it's said to have been called such after the monk whose name was Saint Bernard from 1091 to 1153. And his hospice was founded in the Alpine Pass that bears his name, so that the dog breed was named after this monk, Saint Bernard. Now, we also have English words formed from the Latin and Greek words for bear, both of which come from a different Proto-Indo-European root, which it would be ultimately spelled RTKO, which is what this Proto-Indo-European root was. So just to be clear, the Old English word for bear came from the Proto-Indo-European root BHER. But we have another Proto-Indo-European root for bear, and that's RTKO, that came through Latin and Greek, from which English borrowed many words. Built from this Proto-Indo-European root, the word for bear in Latin is ursa, URSA, which was even more specific than just bear. It meant she-bear. English borrowed that word directly pretty early on, and from it we have Ursa Major, the northern constellation also called the Great Bear. Major from Latin meaning great, and Latin Ursa meaning bear. And there's also, of course, Ursa Minor, the Little Bear constellation. From that same Latin root for bear, Ursa, we have a feminine proper name in Ursula, which technically means little she-bear, as does the feminine name Orsa and the masculine name Orson, the most famous of whom is Orson Welles, all of which come from that root that means bear. And when talking about something or someone that is pertaining to or resembling a bear, the adjective is ursine. Just as we have porcine when referring to a pig, bovine for cattle, feline for cat, canine for dog, ursine is the adjective when referring to bears. And if someone is acting bear-like, they're acting ursine. So that's Latin ursa for bear, which came from the Proto-Indo-European root RKTO. And there's also Greek for bear, in which the Proto-Indo-European root RKTO is very apparent. And that's the word arctos, right? ARKTOS. From Greek arctos, English adopts the word Arctic in the late 14th century from Greek arctikos, meaning of the north, or more literally, of the constellation Bear, that same constellation we were just speaking of, Ursa in Latin and Arctikos in Greek. So the Arctic polar region is named such because it's located in the northernmost region on Earth, which is where this northern constellation is most prominent. In the southernmost polar region, opposite the Arctic, is the Antarctic, meaning from anti, meaning opposite. The word Antarctic is an adjective, and it was coined in the 14th century before the continent was named Antarctica. But in that they're both words constructed from Arctic, from bear, they're also etymologies. Arctic, Antarctic, and Antarctica. Hard to say those quickly, 3 in a row. We have another celestial body named from Greek Arctos, and that's the bright star Arcturus, meaning guardian of the bear, because it's positioned behind the tail of the bear constellation Ursa Major. Now, related to this star Arcturus, it's worth mentioning, we have another etymology. It's not bear-related, but we've heard its origins before, and that's the name of the constellation Arcturus is part of, and that's Bootes. Bootes is from Greek meaning plowman or cow herder. I'll spell it for you. It's Bootes with an umlaut over the second O. So Bootes is from Greek meaning cow herder, from Bos, which means cow or bull or ox. And we've talked about that root in previous episodes. And of course, from that word, we get such words as bovine, buccinator. Remember that in the anatomy words episode from animals. Bucolic and bugle are all from that same root. So Bootes is the constellation that Arcturus is part of. From the same Proto-Indo-European root, RKTOS, there is the Welsh root ARTH, arth, which gives English through the old Celtic languages, the masculine name Arthur, the most famous of which is King Arthur, the legendary British hero who is said to have been king of the Britons in the 6th century and who defended Britain against the Saxon invaders. Before he was King Arthur, or even while he was also known as Arthur Pendragon, so his forename and his surname are both etymologies. Pendragon, of course, built from the word pen, meaning head, as in chief, and dragon, a creature we think of as mythical and magical now, but whose name dragon, the word dragon, originally meant huge snake or serpent. Arthur, of course, from bear, is the subject of many tales or Arthurian legends, so that's an adjective as well, the most famous of which is The Death of Arthur, Le Mort Arthur, by Thomas Malory, which cemented the myth of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table in the Western imagination for all time. So back to our English word bear. Of course, the word bear itself has become descriptive based on the qualities of the animal, for better or for worse. For instance, to call someone a bear is to say that they're rough or gruff or rude or unmannerly or uncouth. Such a person might also be described as bearish. We also talk of a bearish market or a bear market as it relates to the stock exchange versus a bullish market or a bull market. In short, a bull market is when the economy is running well, when people have jobs, unemployment is low, and investors are optimistic that stocks will rise. Those investors are aggressive or they're called bullish. A bear market, on the other hand, is the opposite. It's when the market drops. The economy nears recession, unemployment rises, corporate profits fall, and the market is more volatile. And investors are quite pessimistic and have a difficult time picking profitable stocks. So they wait on the sidelines until they feel the trend is ending and only begin to buy stocks when they anticipate a bull market coming. So up, bull, down, bear. And these terms came about in 18th century England and may have to do with the manner in which each of these animals attacks their opponents. A bull would toss his horns up in the air and a bear would swipe downward. Now, certainly, London residents would have been aware of these behaviors because of the grisly blood sport that was popular in particular areas around the city in London, whereby a bull and a bear would each be chained up or confined one way or another and forced to fight each other to the death. But there's even more to the story than that in terms of the bull market and the bear market, and that has to do with the sale of bear skins, to which we unfortunately have to return. The people who transacted the sale of bear skins, the middlemen, as it were, would often sell skins they had yet to receive from the trappers, and thus they would speculate or they would guess on the future purchase price of these skins, hoping the prices would drop so they could make a profit. These middlemen became known as bears, short for bearskin jobbers, an old term for dealers in the stock market. The term stuck and became the way to refer to a downturn in the market. The reason bulls were chosen to refer to the opposite, to the upturn in the market, has to do with that horrible and thank goodness now obsolete blood sport of those bull and bear baits, they were called. Bulls were considered the opposite of bears in terms of how they fought, as I explained. So that's how bulls were chosen to refer to the opposite in terms of the stock market. Now, from those blood sports, we have another etymology, which I just said, and that's the word bait, B-A-I-T. It's from Old Norse for bite, and it meant to set one on another to bite or torment or harass or persecute someone, to bait someone. The meaning of the word originates from these blood sports when animals would be tethered to one another, dogs on bears or bulls on bears or dogs on badgers, and bettors would place money on who would win as they watched these animals tear each other apart. This was entertainment. Sometimes one animal would be tethered or placed in a pit. The dogs would be set upon them. In fact, the English bulldog was bred for and named for just this purpose, to bait bulls, the bull dog. These events were called bear baits or bull baits, depending on the animal used. There were even duck baits, where they would put the ducks in water, but they would tether down their wings so they couldn't fly. They could only kind of float on the top of the water, and they would set the dogs upon them And of course, it was incredibly bloody and violent. And depending on the animal used, they would name them such: bear baits, bull baits, duck baits. And it was a horrific scene that occurred at least twice a week in London through the 19th century. There were also similar events taking place in some regions in the United States in the 19th century, especially in California. It became illegal in England with the passage of the Cruelty to Animals Act in 1835, but many pubs around London still have names that reflect this violent spectacle. So bait as a verb grew out of these blood sports. And yes, if you were paying attention, the verb badger, as in to harass, to attack persistently, also grew out of this abuse, in which badgers were set against dogs for entertainment. The pit where the bears were kept and tortured for what Samuel Pepys in 1666 called a rude and nasty pleasure was called the Bear Garden. And in fact, today there is a well-known British retail company called Bear Garden that sells teddy bears and other plush toys. You're most certainly familiar with the teddy bear. You can call someone a big old teddy bear, talking about them being really cuddly, or you can own a teddy bear, as in a plush toy that adorns your bed and that you sleep with every night. What? I didn't say anything. Teddy bear in that sense, I do have a teddy bear on my bed, okay? Teddy bear in that sense is said to have been named after U.S. President Theodore Teddy Roosevelt, who was an avid hunter, we all know, but who was also a fervid conservationist. There are many apocryphal stories about how teddy bears got their name, and I'll share one with you that is from the Teddy Roosevelt Association, whose facts seem to be pretty well documented. So I think this one is pretty accurate. It goes like this. In 1902, President Roosevelt went on a hunting trip in Mississippi with a hunting party that included apparently the governor of Mississippi at the time. Apparently, after 3 days of hunting, other members of the hunting party had spotted bears, shot bears, but not Roosevelt. God forbid the president himself would not get to shoot a bear. So the next day, the guides tracked down an old black bear that the dogs had been set upon, and they trailed and tracked and attacked. The guides then tied that bear to a tree and called for Roosevelt to come so he could have his kill. Roosevelt, however, took one look at this sick, old, injured bear and refused to shoot him. He felt that doing so would be unsportsmanlike. However, since he saw the bear was suffering from his injuries from having been attacked by the dogs, he ordered that the bear be shot humanely to end his pain. So word of the story hit newspapers across the country, and political cartoonist Clifford Berryman drew a cartoon depicting President Roosevelt refusing to shoot the bear while hunting in Mississippi. This original cartoon ran in the Washington Post on November 16th, 1902. And you can see it online. You can just search for it. And it shows Roosevelt standing in front, in the foreground, and the guide and the bear are in the background, and they're about the same size. Later, similar cartoons appeared, but the bear was smaller and shaking with fear. This bear cub then appeared in other cartoons Clifford Berryman drew throughout Roosevelt's career, cementing the connection between bears and President Roosevelt. Around that time, a man named Morris Michtom, who owned a candy shop in Brooklyn, New York, saw Clifford Berryman's cartoons and decided to capitalize on this image. He displayed in his shop window 2 plush toy bears his wife had made and called them Teddy's bears. They immediately became popular. Michtom mass-produced them, and around the same time, a German company named Steiff, Steiff, which is a company that's still around today making stuffed bears, started making stuffed bears, which also came to be called teddy bears. And it made the international connection when this company started importing these stuffed bears, these teddy bears, into the United States. And of course, this company still continues to make millions of teddy bears, and that's the story behind Teddy's Bears, or now more commonly called teddy bears. Now, you can be as angry as a bear, which is pretty angry. You can be cross as a bear. You can be drunk as a bear, which is pretty drunk. You could be hungry as a bear, which is ravenous. You can growl like a bear. Someone can be a bear of a man. You can say something you're working on is a bear of a task. And in homosexual circles, bear has become its own slang category to refer to a gay man who is on the large side and hairy. You can also say someone is as cuddly as a bear. Really, that's what we think about as teddy bears today. You can give someone a bear hug, or if bear hugs irritate you, it could be said that they give you a bugbear, another etymology. A bugbear or a bugabear, sometimes it's pronounced, is anything that causes fear or anxiety or terror or even just irritation. This compound word, bugbear, combines the words bear and bug, though the first part, bug, seems to have nothing to do with bug as in an insect, but rather from an obsolete Welsh word meaning ghost or goblin or some kind of supernatural being. The origins of bugbear, going all the way back to the 1500s, possibly stems from a hobgoblin that adults created to scare children, making them believe that the object of dread was some kind of monster bear who ate children. So a bugbear. The expression "as busy as a bear in a beehive" implies that you're lazy because, well, bears don't have to work very hard to take honey from beehives. Do bears poo in the woods? Sometimes said with other words, is a sarcastic way of saying yes, because bears do, in fact, poo in the woods. You can be smarter than the average bear, so goes the expression, which originated with the animated character Yogi Bear, whose catchphrase was that he's smarter than the average bear. Now, Yogi Bear was a famous bear, and of course we have other famous bears like Winnie the Pooh and Paddington Bear and Smokey Bear, which brings us to our next etymology. Some of you may be aware that the word smoky is a slang term for a police officer, even more specifically a state trooper. And if you've never used it or heard it before as a term, perhaps you've at least heard of that old, awful yet wonderful 1976 movie called Smokey and the Bandit, starring Burt Reynolds and Sally Fields and Jackie Gleason. Well, Smokey in the title was played by Jackie Gleason, and he was the highway patrol officer in the film. The slang term came about because the uniform, and especially the hat, of state troopers resembled that donned by Smokey the Bear, which was a cartoon figure used in the U.S. Forest Service's fire prevention campaign. So Smokey the Bear would be in all of these public service announcements, encouraging people to prevent forest fires. So Smokey, as a slang term for police officer or state trooper, came about from that cartoon figure. But Smokey wasn't the only slang term that came about from this character to refer to police. Apparently bear and its many offshoots was also used. So you have bear as a slang term for police officer, baby bear as a term for a rookie police officer, bear cage for a police station, bear in the air to refer to a police officer in the air, like in a helicopter, bear trap to refer to a speed limit enforcement trap, and lady bear as a slang term for a female cop. All from Smokey the Bear, we get Smokey and bear and all of those slang terms. Some other familiar things have been named after bears. We have the woolly bear moths and the woolly bear caterpillars. And stay tuned for another episode when I tell you about how the word caterpillar is in itself an etymology. Woolly bears, of course, were named for their dense coat of soft hairs resembling that of bears. We have bear grass in the U.S., named apparently by Lewis and Clark in their journey west, though no one knows why it's called such. It might be because bears come and eat the shoots and roots of this bear grass, of this grass. And the bearberry is named specifically for that reason, because it's a type of berry in the U.S. that bears love to eat. And of course, one of the things we love to eat, or I love to eat, is the delicious bear claw, as in the pastry, which apparently, this was fun to discover, according to the Dictionary of American Regional English, which is a wonderful resource if you're not already tapped into it, bear claw is native to my own beloved city of Oakland, which is where I reside. Bear claws are very simple pastry. They're delicious. They're a filled pastry. There's, flour, sugar, all the things that taste good. And it's similar to a Danish. Its shape resembles that of the claw of a bear. So that's how it got its name. There's evidence that its name goes all the way back to 1918 in Colorado. But then just a couple years after that, in the Oakland Tribune, my beloved paper, which I've contributed editorials to, and whose original building, the Oakland Tribune building, is an iconic feature in the Oakland cityscape. You'll see it in downtown. It's a beautiful old building. The Oakland Tribune, which is now called the East Bay Times, it was purchased and now it's called the East Bay Times, but we see the reference to bear claws, this pastry, in the Tribune, in the Oakland Tribune in 1921, also as an advertisement for bear claws for this pastry. 2 bear claws for 5 cents. So it's possible that the pastry was named as an homage to the animals from whom the state of California gets its nickname, the Bear State. And of course, if you look at the California flag, the state flag, or our state seal, you'll see a bear on both, referring specifically to the California grizzly bear, the Ursus, now you know this word, Arctos californicus. The Ursus arctos californicus designated the official state animal in 1953, and it endures as the mascot of the sports teams of the University of California, Berkeley, the California Golden Bears, and of the University of California, Los Angeles, the UCLA Bruins, because now you know that Bruin comes from the word bear. But those are, unfortunately, the only places you will see the California grizzly, because humans killed every last one of them, and now they're extinct. They haven't been seen since the 1920s. Before we killed them off, California grizzlies would have been the animals who were forced to participate in that bear and bull biting blood spectacles in California that were popular in England, but inspired by England and brought to California. So the California grizzlies would have been used for such atrocities before we killed them. A few other words related to bears, or rather to their babies, are those built from the word cub. In the early 1500s, the word cub, C-U-B, came into English to characterize the young of a fox in particular, and then by extension, by the late 1500s, it was used to refer to the young of bears, and then also wolves and lions. The exact origin of cub in this context is not known, but we use it today to refer to someone who's young and inexperienced, a novice, as in a cub reporter. And of course, you have a Cub Scout who's a member of the junior division of the Boy Scouts for boys ages 8 through 10. The word cubbyhole, as in a small, snug space or compartment, comes from a completely different word, as much as it evokes the small den or burrow that little cubs would nap in. But cubbyhole comes from a different word entirely. And yet it is still an etymology, because it appears that the word cubbyhole from the word cubby or cub is an Old English 16th century dialect word that meant a small pen for animals. So that's how we get the word cubbyhole, because it actually referred to a small pen for animals. And then, of course, we have all those bear verbs, meaning to carry something, as in to bear a burden, or to bear a grudge, or to bear something in mind, to bear down on, to bear fruit, to bear resemblance to. And I'm sorry to say that none of these are etymologies. That word bear, as in the verb meaning to carry, comes from an entirely different word. Old English bearan, B-E-R-A-N. And that's what also created bearing wall, or to get your bearings, or ball bearing, none of which have anything to do with bears. A bearing wall carries the weight. You carry or bear a child. You bear or carry a grudge, none of which have anything to do with the animals in the Ursidae family. But don't complain. I gave you so many words from bears. So we have Bruin, Beowulf, Berserk, Bjorn, Barnard, Bernard, Ursa Major, Ursa Minor, Ursula, Ursa, Orson, Ursine, Arctic, Antarctic, Antarctica, the star Arcturus, Arthur, bearish as an adjective, bear market, bait, bear garden, teddy bear, bear hug, bugbear, smoky as a slang, bear as a slang for police officer and its offshoots, baby bear, bear in the air, bear trap, and lady bear, woolly bear caterpillars, woolly bear moths, bear grass, bearberry, bear claw, as in the pastry, cub, cub reporter, and Cub Scout, and then expressions like angry like a bear, cross as a bear, hungry as a bear, growl like a bear, cuddly as a bear, busy as a bear, in a beehive, do bears poo in the woods, smarter than the average bear, which now you are smarter than the average bear. I don't know, bears are pretty smart. So that's all I got. If you appreciate anything you've learned from today's episodes, please share this episode. Please leave a rating and review at iTunes. And of course, please consider supporting Animology by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Colleen. Patrick-Goudreau. If you don't, I'm going to have a bear of a time researching and writing and producing the next podcast episode for the animals. Thanks for listening to Animology, changing the way we talk and think about animals.